It is significant, but it's also desperate. He is losing. And the battlefield reality he faces is, I think, irreversible. In other words, over the last 7 months, President Zelenskyy and Ukraine have mobilized vastly better than has Russia. In other words, Ukraine has recruited, trained, equipped, organized, and employed forces incomparably better than Russia has. And the reality facing Russia now is that Ukraine, a country a third the size of Russia, has a bigger, much more effective army on the ground and other assets as well. All of this, of course, supported by the arsenal of democracy. The United States now up to $17 billion, over another billion announced this week, in military arms, ammunition, and materiel, and also supported by the other NATO countries and other Western countries around the world. So he faces a situation that I think, again, is irreversible. There's no amount of shambolic mobilization, which is the only way to describe it, no amount of annexation, no amount of even veiled nuclear threats can actually get him out of this particular situation. He announced the annexation, and he's already lost a really critical element in that, a critical city that would have been a very key supply hub had they been able to go farther. And that's just going to continue. He's going to continue to lose on the battlefield. And at some point, there's going to have to be recognition of that. At some point, there's going to have to be some kind of beginning of negotiations, as President Zelenskyy has said, will be the ultimate end. And at some point, by the way, as well, I strongly agree with the idea of Ukraine becoming part of NATO, although, as Senator Rubio noted, let's make sure that the battlefield goes well first.
But by irreversible, you mean that Russia cannot win this war?
There's nothing he can do at this point. Again, to even
the losses have been staggering.
They have been many multiples in 7 months what Russia lost in nearly a decade in Afghanistan. Many, many multiples. And again, they're losing on the battlefield, and it's going to continue. The only question really is, when do you start to see not just individual soldiers or small units surrender, but when you start to see larger units crumble, crack, and perhaps actually collapse? And I think that will be coming. And then the questions for President Zelenskyy will be, do we retake that little part of the Donbass that was controlled by the separatists since 2014? And what about Crimea? And when do we have some kind of negotiation with Russia? And of course, by the way, in response to this annexation, Russia got hit by 100,000 more individual, personal, and other sanctions, showing that the West still has more that can be done to Russia. It can still get worse for Putin and for Russia. And even the use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield won't change this at all.
And do you take the threat? I mean, you have to take the threat seriously.
You have to take the threat seriously.
And we talked about a precedent set by the United States.
You have to take that seriously. And Jake Sullivan has publicly stated that the U.S. has communicated to Russia what would happen in response to that.
And what would happen?
Well, again, I have deliberately not talked to Jake about this.
Yeah.
I mean, just to give you a hypothetical, we would respond by leading a NATO, a collective effort, that would take out every Russian conventional force that we can see and identify on the battlefield in Ukraine, and also in Crimea, and every ship in the Black Sea Fleet.
So it would bring America and NATO into the war. I mean, it would be an Article 5 situation, basically.
Not an Article 5 because they're not part of NATO, but it would be a U.S. and NATO response to something that is absolutely.
I mean, the argument's made the radiation would extend into NATO countries. It effectively would be an attack on NATO.
Yeah, and perhaps you can make that case. The other case is that this is so horrific that there has to be a response. It cannot go unanswered, but it doesn't expand. It's not nuclear for nuclear. You don't want to, again, get into a nuclear escalation here, but you have to show that this cannot be accepted in any way. Well, he's trying to cast this in any way that he can, in a way to appear threatening, to be threatening, to try to get Europe to crack. He thinks he can outsuffer Europe, if you will. You know, the Russians have outsuffered Napoleon and the Nazis and so forth, but I don't think he's going to outsuffer Europe. Europe's going to have a tough winter. There's going to be a very reduced flow of natural gas, but they'll get through it. And I don't think they'll crack on the issue of support for Ukraine.
I mean, does Putin have to worry about opposition in Russia?
He does. This is why he didn't declare even the partial mobilization until just now. He was hesitant. And of course, now it's too late because he can't generate enough capable replacements and forces and units to plug the gaps. They're just going to continue to try to reestablish new defensive lines in the east. They're going to lose Kherson in the south, and eventually you're going to see some puncture in Donetsk and Zaporizhia in the center south as well. So again, they're in a very, very difficult situation. Reportedly, more Russian men have left the country than have actually been conscripted or brought back in this
Incredible. We've seen the